Hey guys, today we're going to take a bit of a look at magnesium levels that are required on for humans. We've got historically we've got a lot of uh, the RDIs set by committees, and a lot of these committees are being set by a lot of epidemiological research, a lot of data that's come in from labs, lab works, like in the general population, what are the sort of ranges in healthy people, younger people, or whatever. That doesn't tell you that whether people are eating species inappropriate or getting sufficient or not. It just tells you what is being observed. And then they do all these adjustments. And we know when you take an observation, you adjust it. You can end up with a lot of skewed statistical results. I mean, Bart's sort of pointed this out in the past for some of my subscribers that know who I'm talking about. But, anyway, this is a more recent study that's actually looked at 27 well-controlled type studies. So the methodology is slightly different in the way it's applied. So it's sort of more tightly controlled, and they're actually, collecting feces and urine from these people to do proper measurements of to see what they're excreting. So to be able to work out much more precise what's the intake, the input, and what's the output, to be able to work out, do we need 6, like the older RDI was 6 milligrams per kilo of body weight. Then in more recent times, it's gone between, you'll see a number of people saying 7 to 10. But the problem with that is where you have to understand where it's coming from. What we've had is we've got more people now eating less animal foods and more plant foods. And agriculture since the 60s, when the Green Revolution happened, we're using more phosphorus or more industrial petrochemically produced fertilizers, and our soils are becoming depleted of a lot of minerals. So the intake of food may be a certain amount, but the actual numbers that the USDA has, like in the databases are fairly old, from the 50s and 60s, where they look at animal foods, and those animal foods, they've got specific data, for animal foods or plant foods, specific amounts of magnesium. The problem is those magnesium levels have been declining. And so each time they look at that, they go, we must need more to basically maintain, and this is where the problem has lied, that we've gone from assuming we need more and then recommending that we need more. It's because we're looking at what the situation is in the human population, but we're ignoring that the soils are poorer, all these things that are, so you'd have to go back and do all those original studies again to look at what the soil levels are around the countries, the different countries, and actually then average out that measurement and then do proper controlled studies to work out exactly, So unfortunately that hasn't, there's only been limited research that have done a bit of that information, and that's been done through the agricultural sort of organisations or departments or whatever, obviously because they want to know what the soils are like, what the animals are eating and stuff like that, because they are managing these things, these resources. So when you take that data, and the researchers have this newer data now about soils and other things like that, and then they do measurements on humans, tightly controlled measurements to get the information, then they can get a much better understanding of, you're eating this sort of stuff, what's the inputs and what's the outputs, to be able to work a much tighter and better, so you don't have to do all these so-called adjustments that we see in a whole lot of other studies. Anyway, let's just take a look. And but just a reminder for everyone, nothing's perfect in this world. Just remember that, keep that always in your mind. Nothing's perfect. But the current estimates are being ramped up each year. It's because of the poor soils and the old data, and people are basically making wrong conclusions is what is happening. So magnesium requirements, new estimations for men and women by cross-sectional statistical analysis of metabolic magnesium balance data. So you've got from 1 to 4, you've got the old, this has been going on for a couple of years, the Food and Nutritional Board Institute of Medicine, dietary reference, intake for calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, vitamin D, fluoride. This goes all the way back to 1997. And these are more recent ones, 2005, 2003, 2003, and more recent stuff in looking at some of this data. There are a whole lot of other studies there as well. People can go and look at them at those who are interested. Okay, the background. Current recommendations for magnesium requirements are based on sparse, balanced data, and that's true. It's, as I said, it's really a lot of information which has varied qualities. And unfortunately, committees have basically used that poorer data to make recommendations. And each time they find, well, okay, there are more deficiencies now. They haven't looked at the agricultural data, and the NIH is just pushing up the RDI each time. So that's not the way to do it. You need to do proper research, and these people at least are looking. So Hunt and Johnson are basically reviewing the literature and looking at these sort of studies and what they've concluded. So objective, to provide new estimates of the average magnesium requirements for men and women. We pulled magnesium data from 27 different tightly controlled balanced studies conducted. So they've actually excluded people. I'll explain further down who they have. Pretty much people who are deficient. So, if you've got electrolyte imbalances, you've got issues or whatever, you've got to exclude people. You want healthy people. You want to really get a proper measure within a healthy population. So you exclude a number of people that will not fit that criteria, because we're trying to find out what's required for humans, not what's required for people who are diabetics, as an example, or really deranged or whatever. So that's a different question altogether. And so this is more applicable for people like us as well. But keep in mind that magnesium intake for carnivores, for people low carb, is going to be lower for the simple fact that carbohydrate metabolism actually requires slightly more magnesium. So the number that we're going to get here isn't necessary. It will be more than optimal for somebody on a carnivore diet, but will be essential for somebody on a SAD diet who's got a much higher carbohydrate metabolism, and magnesium is required for carbohydrate metabolism far more than beta oxidation. So just keep that in mind. Some of the enzymes and all that are more magnesium dependent for carbohydrate metabolism compared to fat metabolism. So just keep that in your heads. But anyway, I'm not against getting to the levels that they're recommending, but even if you were to be slightly below that, I wouldn't get too worried, is what I'm trying to say to people out there. Okay, so let's continue. So we pulled magnesium data from 27 different tightly controlled balanced studies conducted at the US Department of Agricultural Research Service, Grand Forks Human Nutritional Research Centre at Grand Forks, which I'm not sure where they are. ND. Somebody tell me in the comments where ND is. I should have looked it up earlier. Design, magnesium balance data, magnesium intake. So they looked at fecal magnesium plus urinary magnesium, and they collected 664 data points were collected from 243 subjects, mostly women, 150, and their average age was around 51.3. So middle-aged women, the majority, and men, 93, also within, in a younger age bracket of 28.1. Always surprises me, but it actually doesn't surprise me. You always will find that younger men will go into studies and older women, maybe because by then they become a bit more responsible. I'll leave that for rather than upsetting the feminists, get involved, or maybe they've got more free time by that stage as well. Somebody will tell me. But that's the sort of crowd that we're looking at. So interesting sort of crowd. But what they found is it doesn't really make that much of a difference. So data for the last 6 to 14 days, so 1 week to a fortnight of each period. So greater than 28, a week of 28 days. So we're looking at about a month of each study were analysed and were excluded if individual intakes of calcium, copper, iron, phosphorus, or zinc fell below the respective estimate average requirements, estimated average requirements, or exceeded 99% of the usual intake of these elements, iron above the upper limit. So they wanted to exclude those sort of people and just keep to people that just had normal, proper levels of these other ions, to make sure that that wasn't going to skew or affect the balance of, magnesium. And these ones can also affect magnesium and potassium as well to some extent, and sodium. But this is focused on magnesium. So obviously, but it does count for if you're doing studies and looking at potassium and sodium, you have to make sure that these other ones are within the right range, not outside the range, to make sure you're going to end up getting, because of the osmolyte effect that happens in the intra and extracellular fluids. Taurine plays a big role in that, but that sort of balancing of the ions, that's what they're trying to avoid, any unusual sort of levels which would affect their results, which is a good idea. So let's continue. So they basically from the 94 continuous survey on food intake by individuals, daily intake of magnesium range between 84 to 598 milligrams. And the output was investigated by fitting random coefficiency models, which you're not adjusting the data. Your hypothesis is based on looking at basically those numbers without making any sort of adjustments. So do the numbers that have been collected, do they basically, do they correlate or don't they correlate, the hypothesis type thing? So it's not like other studies where they are adjusting to say, oh, well, we want to adjust for people based on, are they smokers? Are they doing this? Are they doing that? No, we're just looking at the data we've got the hypothesis is we believe that the intake doesn't need to be as high; it needs to be lower. Well, what is the correlation between the data? That means the feces, the urine, all that sort of stuff, in comparison to that, and how closer is it to what the hypothesis is, what is being investigated and considered, in a sense, without going too much into the explaining how that's used in statistics. Anyway, results. The bully predicted neutral magnesium balance, defined as magnesium output Y equal to magnesium intake, M at the magnesium intake of around about. So when we're looking at in and out, so the intake of 165 milligrams. So this is for a person around, remember the people around about 70 kilos, the men and women, more or less. So this is the sort of average weight. This is what in most studies they're trying to get, this sort of average weight, which is 154 pounds and 70 kilograms. So it's something that they use in research for a lot of different studies when they're looking at populations to try and get that sort of healthy average height and average weight as the type of people that they want to use to, and then work out their numbers. So if we go down at what that translates to, it pretty much translates to about 2.36 milligrams per kilogram of body weight daily. Okay, so that's what, and then what they found is neither age nor sex affected the relationship between magnesium intake and output. So what they've measured, the findings suggest a lower magnesium requirement for healthy men and women than estimated previously. So that's what they're finding, and their conclusion is. I'm not going to go through the whole study because that would take 8 hours or quite some time. People can go through and look at the actual numbers of different people, their intake, the Haynes data that they've used, and a whole lot of different other data sets in that regard. So that's the new number. If you want an exact number, what would that look like? We would say 165, divide that by 70 is basically 2.3571 milligrams per kilogram. Divide that by 2.2. That would translate per pound would be 1.071 per pound. So that's your magnesium requirement for a pound. 1.07 plus, and per kilogram is pretty much 2.357 or 2.36, whatever you want to use. Okay, so let's now take a look at meats. Why is this going slow? So if we're looking at like meats and stuff like that, pork tenderloin, 35 as an example. So let's say we're looking at a person who's the average 70 kilograms or 154 pounds, 165, divide that by 35. You would need for pork tenderloin times you'd need 471.5 grams of per day to get all the requirements you need. Okay? So that's what, just one meal, just having, half a kilo of pork will cover it for you in that regard. And if you look at that, you're sort of, you're about, what is it? Protein, you'd probably get sufficient. You probably need a bit more for protein, wouldn't you? I suspect. So if we were to just divide that by, again, times about, 24, you're getting about 113 grams of protein. Divide that by 70, about 1.6. So that's still lower. You'd still need to eat more to get to the 2 grams per kilo body weight. So you'd definitely be eating more of this if that was your only meal to get your protein requirements around the 2 grams. I usually recommend 2 grams for women, 2.2 for men. If people are if women are slightly not very active, 1.8 for men who are less active, 2 for people that are really active, then you're pushing up to 2.5 to 3.5 in terms of protein. But this is just to give you an idea that you will eat sufficient. If you eat for sufficient protein for your requirements, you'll get sufficient magnesium. Okay, is what I'm trying to get across in that. Turkey slightly lower, chicken slightly lower, deer tenderloin a bit lower in that regard. Bacon 31 a bit lower in that regard. So if you want to just live off bacon as an example, I'm not saying people to live off bacon. I'm just saying if you were to live off bacon just for a laugh to pass your time if you needed to, and if you're 70 kilos, you'd need to eat about 500 times 532.25 grams. Divide that by 20 is 16. So 1 pound and nearly three ounces. So 1 pound and 3 ounces would give you in terms of bacon. So if you had a pound of bacon, a bit over a pound of bacon, you would get all your magnesium requirements. So it's not very hard on a carnivore diet to basically do that. If you eat enough sufficient, obviously some of the other meats, the steaks and all ribeyes and all that goes down to 27. Okay, yeah, and 26 like lamb and stuff like that. So fine. We'll go down to the 25s, which is certain cuts of meats. But people eat that's why I say eat varied meats. Don't eat just ribeyes or this or that. So let's go to the 24. Even at 24, 165 divided by 24 times is about 600, nearly 690 grams. Divide that by 28, 3. That's practically a bit over 1.5 pounds. So 1.5 pounds of most meats will give you all the magnesium you need for a 70-kilo person. For a lighter person, far less. And we're talking about ideal body weight here. So, you have your height in meters. So, let's say you're 6, let's say as an example, we'll go for somebody who's getting a more so 5'6", so 5 foot, because remember you do the 6 divided by 12, you get half. So 5.5 feet, 5.5 feet, in a sense, is what I'm doing there, is let's say 1.68 meters times 1.68 meters times, so you convert it to meters, and then you times it on itself, the height, and then you times it by 22.5 for men. For women, it's 21, because we're just built more bulkier. Unless you're a really lean runt of a man, you don't have a lot of muscularity. Okay, so which means about 63.5 kilograms for such a person is what, like a male in this case. Yes, I'm going to be biased, males. You can do the calculations, ladies. Now, so if we're looking at that sort of level, and get another calculator up here. 165 divided by 70. So, oops. Control A. Copy. Okay. So that would mean the requirement would be, go back there, 63.5 times 2.2. So for somebody who's 5.5 feet or 168 centimeters, their requirement would only be and who is so ideal body weight for a male, 63.5 kilograms, and in pounds, nearly 140 pounds. For that person, the requirement will be nearly 150 milligrams. You getting the understanding now? So, as you can see, for that average person, we're not talking about a 6 foot person or over 6 foot like Sean Baker, but the average will be around that sort of level, so 150. So now if we convert that with the 24, which is, we're looking at having to go all the way down here, like minced pork, the skin of the thighs, and ground mince and all that tends to be, because it has a bit more fat as well, so it tends to be basically have more less protein or less flesh to have the magnesium, so it drops a bit to 24. So if let's say you just eat mince, ground mince, so divide that by 24, you would have to eat 625 grams of mince every day to get the magnesium you require for that height, for the average height and all that. And if we divide that by 28 and even if you've noticed, people in that study were down to the lowest part, about like 84 intake. The body can cope and can recover, especially if you're eating sufficient food to have enough taurine synthesized by your pancreas to regulate the ions. You will excrete less. The body does it, especially when it's properly regulated. But we're just talking about here, if you want to optimize, you would basically look at, for somebody at that average height, 625, and then and didn't want to eat any other food, no seafood, no dairy, no nothing. Just wanted to eat meat. Obviously, if you eat other foods or eat even more than this, you'll get more than enough. I'm just trying to show people that there isn't going to be an issue, and this applies to a lot of other minerals as well. It's just that we've got very biased RDIs, which are focused on people eating plants, which are devoid, absolutely devoid of minerals in many cases, or have very little, or a lot of it's bound by oxalate, which you never even get to absorb anyway. So it's ridiculous that we have to basically determine ours by that. And even based on those people, on healthy people that are on a omnivorous diet, not a carnivore diet, but an omnivorous diet with anti-nutrients and everything else, they are still, that is what their inputs and outputs give them, that they balance out at those numbers at 2.36 approximately milligrams per kilo of body weight, or 1.07 milligrams per pound. So that's pretty good in that sort of level. So even if we're slightly below that, we're still going to be fine. But as you can see, even just eating sufficient meat, you're going to be fine as well in that regard. So that would pretty much mean, let's take 16 out of that, out of the ounces. So we've got pretty much 1 pound and 6 ounces, more or less, of ground mince. So if you have a pound and 6 ounces of ground, pork, ground beef, whatever, you will get more than enough. Okay? So now let's look at some other stuff. Don't know why this is slow today. Anyway, obviously when you look at the dairy side is much higher. It just is in that regard. So if you're actually adding some eggs, some cheese and all that, you're going to exceed your requirements very, very easily. So that's the people that are doing like the lion's diet only. And this is for everyone else, like myself, that, eat a lot of different things in that regard. So obviously, I don't want to see people being, dried weight powder and stuff like that, unless you're a bodybuilder. So, or egg powder, you don't need it. But there's like goat cheese, the hard cheese, like the bald man in New Zealand, he'd be eating a bit of that. So 100 grams, which is, remember, 3.53 ounces. So 3.5 plus ounces of, hard goat cheese will give you, this was actually soft, wasn't it? Yeah, it was soft. So it'd be slightly less because it's got more moisture, more water in it. It's less concentrated. So that's got about 100 grams, and I can easily eat, like myself, that is, very easily I can consume, 60, 70 grams of cheese, of goat cheese. Mostly I actually eat about 100 grams or more. So that's easy to get that amount. So you can see very quickly how, Eden cheese 30 per 100, very similar to meats and stuff like that. So if you eat that and throw in, some additional stuff, it's very easy to get into those numbers. If you go to some of the other cheeses, it's a bit lower. As you can see, brie is 20, sort of your yogurt, 100 grams of yogurt is about 19. Again, it's less concentrated. Goat milk, 14. Fried eggs, so 2 eggs, because 100 grams is about 2 eggs, is 13. So let's say you are having 6 eggs, which is what I usually have a day most of the time. If I can be, unless I'm bored. So usually that's 78. You can see that that takes a substantial amount out. So if you're sort of at your 70 kilo average person and you take out 78 out of 165, you can see you're left with that amount, 87. So 6 eggs as an example. Hold on. No, I did it wrong, didn't I? I think I did it wrong. Fried eggs, 13 divided by 2. Now times it by 6, 39. Sorry. Now, if we take out the 39 from 165, so just 6 eggs by that by 24. So basically half a kilogram or slightly over, so 525 kilograms of meat. Obviously, it's going to be lower the other cuts of meat. So if you're having just 6 eggs and some mince, 525 grams, or 1 pound and 2.5 ounces, let's say 3 ounces, 1 pound and 3 ounces of mince plus 6 eggs, pretty much gives you everything you want for that sort of average person. So it's not difficult, and certain things have got far more. So if you know, one thing that my dad does consume a lot is all his cheeses, sort of goat cheese. He just loves it, both hard and soft. So he will consume about sometimes 150 grams of it in a day, a couple of eggs, some meat, and a few other things that he shouldn't eat. But anyway, he does. So, but there are other, types of cheese. I've no idea why the non-fat American cheese. It's probably because it's got a lot of proteins, but probably concentrated quite a bit. So as a consequence, it ends up with far more, Parmesan. The Parmesans tend to have quite a bit. If you see here, hard grated Parmesan, shredded Parmesan, grated Parmesan cheese. They tend to, don't worry about it, whether it says low sodium. Sodium doesn't have an effect on how much magnesium is going to be in there. It's just how much whether they've put any or they haven't. So when you look at that sort of stuff, in that regard, there's your sort of options. I get the regular sort of Swiss cheese because I like it. I just put it on top of my patties and stuff like that. So that tends to have 36 milligrams per 100 grams per 3.5. And I have goat cheese as well because Dad buys for both of us. And sometimes I go and buy it because he's struggling now with his walking and all that. So either one. The nice thing is the local businessman that sells it to him is actually also driving him back home, which is nice. It's a very wealthy individual, but in our community, but he's a nice man. He's a fairly decent guy. He's not an asshole or anything like that. So has a lot of respect for the elders, and he'll drive them, help them out, and stuff like that. So, not everyone with money is an asshole. Anyway, so that, and then you've got seafood, which is another option for those who, you may find people that, don't want to eat a lot of meat or whatever. Seafood can vary from, like Atlantic mackerel, 97 per 100. So you'll find that raw Atlantic mackerel is 76. So if the cooked is actually more. So when you cook, you liberate slightly more. And that's why we cook food, as I've said in the past, because it will reduce, break down those, and you'll end up less in the colon, so to speak. If you have more raw things, less of it's going to be broken down by stomach acidity and stuff like that, especially the older you get. That's why cooking is really useful, because it actually breaks down things. It denatures it, and then the stomach acidity denatures it fully because we don't absorb foreign proteins. That gives us autoimmunity, not a good thing. So what we absorb is amino acids, fatty acids, and simple sugars for those who are eating inappropriate. And the small amounts there are in animal foods as well. And that's really what. So you can actually see octopus has got about 60, far better than, oyster, 54 per 100. They got all that. Crabs, 63. So you've got bluefin tuna, 64. Yellowfin tuna is similar, but it's not in this part of this database. I don't know why they haven't measured it, because I couldn't see it. So, see raw bluefin, much less. I don't think there is. No, no. Sardines canned, 39. Fried calamari, which is one of my favourites, in butter, fried in butter. Yummy, yummy, yummy. Anyway, get your mind off the food and concentrate on what you're eating, young man. So 30, 39. So very easy. So if you were just to eat fried calamari for the day, and let's say you were, what do we say? The 50 for that average person, not the somebody at 5.5 feet. You're looking at something 150. Divide that by 38. You just need about 400 grams nearly. Or 14. So 400 grams or 14 ounces. So 14 ounces of fried calamari would cover you. So you can see it's not very difficult to get what you require on a carnivore diet based on proper measurements of what we require. Now, if you take into consideration that carbohydrate metabolism requires far more, obviously we require slightly less. But I always say aim for this new level, 2.36, and you shouldn't go wrong at all in that regard. So I'll just stop sharing that. So that's based on the latest sort of data and research that's been done on people, looking at intakes and so inputs and outputs, and working out exactly what do we really require as healthy humans, not as people that are diabetics or all these other things, people who are in a deranged state of deficiency or whatever else. Actual healthy people that don't have any deficiencies or whatever are in a good state. What is their optimal, what they absolutely require optimally. I also believe that the body has the ability through when things are regulated, the osmolytes, the ions. We know that when you supplement children with taurine, this is what they're doing in the Gaza Strip, the kids basically who are deficient in a number of minerals, they normalise, especially the young girls with their iron levels. That's where that research went. But they've actually also seen this affected other homeostasis of ions, because we know that taurine is very essential in the kidneys to regulate the ions and so you don't excrete as much. You can recycle and put them back, in the filtered blood. You can put them back and recover them, as it does recover the things and puts them back into the bloodstream. So that's the nice thing about if a body's properly regulated. But obviously these kids would be deficient in protein, so they wouldn't be getting enough foods which are high in taurine, so they have to supplement them in the Gaza Strip. But we are getting more than enough to synthesize. What we use taurine is for biohacking or for healing when we've got underlying conditions. But if you're healthy, young, you don't have any issues, and you're just living a regular life, you don't need to really supplement. If you're doing a lot of bodybuilding and all that, and you want to actually, increase your performance and reduce your oxidative, the damage to you, that can happen, so you can actually last longer and reduce lactate levels and stuff like that, then, taurine can be useful for training, to train longer, harder, stuff like that, if you want to build up more, become more muscular. For longevity biohacks, increasing stem cells in the brain, reducing oxidative stress, improving melatonin production, regulating a number of things in the body as we get older. All these things can be an advantage, improving the immune function, the immune system. So that's why we use it as a biohack. But that also means that if we're either using it as a supplement or eating sufficient protein and synthesizing, then our requirements should be even lower than this. So if we aim for this 2.36 milligrams per kilo of body weight, or 1.07 milligrams per pound of body weight, if we aim for that, we target that, we shouldn't go wrong in terms of our intake of our magnesium requirements. So I hope this is useful for you, and also will save you a bit of dosh, and cut out your magnesium supplementations, because sometimes magnesium supplementation can cause electrolyte derangements as well. So we've got to be very careful to try and get these things from the food, and less, because if we're not eating enough protein, why aren't we? Because it's essential. Got a whole lot of enzymes, a whole lot of things that we need to maintain. So we need to stop, and if we get enough, we should get enough of these minerals as well, is what I'm trying to say to people. So you don't need those electrolytes unless you're a high-end performance athlete and all that, and you're really losing a lot of electrolytes. You're out. That's a different. Most people are not going to be doing that. Most tribal people don't do that. They walk, and only when they see an animal, they'll sprint and spear. That's different. But they're not basically doing these high intensity things, or doing these long distance marathons, or lifting shitloads of weight, doing this type of the level that some people do, not everyone in our society. The majority of people that are on a carnivorous diet, if they're eating sufficient animal foods, they should get enough magnesium. You do not need to supplement, is what I'm trying to say. So I hope you found this useful. See yous.